database, can we now create a program and then uh, can we now create a program that actually interfaces it? Maybe you can have a menu driven program that asks the user for different values and then insert them, maybe perform some checks on top of it, or maybe create a new table for a user. So we should be able to execute those queries that we saw by just the code execute command. How? So when we run this code again, essentially we see that our database already has now an entry from the earlier time. It already has an entry for A1000, which is a 1 million, right? And A1000 is just a primary key. So when we try to insert into account again with the same primary key with new set of values, we are not allowed to do that, right? The primary key needs to be unique. And that is why it gives us an error. Does that make sense? How? Um, how the pound sign or the hash symbol is just for comments in Python. We are not placing any pound signs inside the query itself. Not in front of it. The pound signs have no meaning. I mean, I was just commenting out that code to show you that it crashed. So the hash sign is basically your C++'s forward slash slashes for comments, or your sequels dash dash. I mean, we can delete this. Is that what you were asking? Cool. Does that make sense? What I just said. It's just a comment, right? Okay. Cool. Okay. So so this should help you guys out when you are writing your or you're coding your source files for your project. Essentially, this class will not require that much of a programming interface with the database. Here, we will mainly be focusing on SQL stuff, more or less, and then connecting to a SQL database using SQL queries and other functions like that. But for your project, you might consider using a program based interface where we can actually add on or tack on some more capabilities, if you so want, on your project, on your database design as well, right? So make it easier for the user to connect to the database and ask for results, or maybe make it into a menu driven insert system, or we can also do some other really cool things. So for example, let's go back to the code real quick, and I want everyone to answer here. And so let's go back to this code real quick. So let's say that I will only allow yes, let's say that I will only allow select operations or displaying my results. Essentially, I will only allow a user to display results from a particular bank account if the user does not give me the exact bank setup. One of the, let's say I will only allow the user to, not a particular bank account, but let's say from either Belledale, Breton, or Central, right? I will only allow the user to query results from these three bank accounts. So if my program is the only interface that the, so let me explain what we want again. Tell me if you guys understand this. So let's say that my program is the only interface between the database and the user, and I only want the user to be able to see results from either Belledale branches or Breton branches or Brighton branches, right? Or Central branches, let's say, right? Only allow results from these branches and no other branch. So if the program is the only way of communicating with the database, can we write a piece of code that would essentially allow me to do that, or allow me to put that constraint on the user. Creating a view. Yes, but let's say that I want the user to be able to do something like, yes, a view, yes, but let's say that I want the user to be able to only uh, query certain branches, not all branches. So a view is just a specific query, right? I want the user to be able to only query either Belledale or Breton or Central or things like that. So if the user let's say wants the results from Deer Park, I would want the user to get an error that this you are not allowed to view this branch, something like this. How would we do something like that? You can either type out an answer or just that thing. So Yogi, you mean like a function, right? Not a view, but a function. Right. Yes, we can do it as a view, obviously, but let's say that we want to do it in a program. Can we do that? Like write Python code for it or C++ code for it? If we are able to connect to a database, can we just use an if condition? And your answer is correct. And we will look into certain situations about that in today's class as well. But we can just constrain those branches using an if condition, right? In our program as well. Right. If or a switch. Okay. So basically having a programming interface on top of your database allows you to get more, allows you to perform certain things that our database might not be really happy with you doing. So we will talk about some of the things, but mainly today we are going to talk about a concept called triggers. So for this programming aside, so we will talk a lot of about a lot of things. Okay, let's ask you one other thing. I mean, all of you guys. Let's say that I have a table, right? So I have a table. Let's say that I have a table. So create table that has, I don't know what, let's just make the schema. Let's say that I have a table that is, mm, this thing. Um, yes, let's say it's a book borrow table, right? So borrowed, let's say, and it has the book ID and a timestamp that is for essentially a date of, right. So and so everyone can see this notepad, right? So let's say that I have a table that sort of looks like this. I have a book ID, I have a timestamp that essentially is set to now, right? So if I want, let's say that I want to, let me rephrase this question. Let's say we also have a volume. Right, we have a book ID that is a character array. We have a volume that is, let's say, an integer, and we have a timestamp that essentially tells us when this particular row was inserted. Okay, so now let's say that we want to update this table such that I just want to update the volume of a book ID. Let's say, I don't know, A. Let's say given a book ID of A555, I want to update the volume entry of that book to, let's say, version 3. So we can do this using an update statement, right? If this is our table, we can use an update statement to update the volume of the book with the book ID A555. Can everyone sort of visualize the query or understand the query, what would be required for this? Yeah, type in yes or no, please, or just speak. Yes. So when we actually update the table, would the now value, that the third attribute, that is the timestamp, would that also be updated? Yes or no? Or maybe not date of borrow, date of change, modified date, let's say. So if I want to, whenever I make any changes to that particular row, I also want the now entry or that third attribute to be updated. Can I do that using an update table? Yes, right? We can just have, instead of just the volume, we can just say volume and the modified row and set that to version 3, and this one again becomes now, right? Or we can also say that whenever we make an update, we can sort of use the program to update the current time index to directly to the table without asking the user for an extra attribute. So we can sort of add more. So the thing that I'm driving at with this weird little example is essentially we can add more functionality to basically make the life of the user a bit more easier. Again, it is again going to be similar to that of a function. All the capabilities that we have from a SQL function will again be available in Python as well. But this also allows you to get input from the user, print stuff out, and things like that. Okay. So today mainly we are going to talk about the SQL components that we have learned so far, and mainly we are going to talk about a bit more data definition language concept. So we talked about creating tables, we talked about creating databases, we talked about creating functions and procedures. Those languages are called, remember, procedural SQL, so PLSQL and those sort of things. Um, and those were all schemas, right? So essentially, our table is a schema, and in SQL, um, a function is also a schema. So today we are going to talk about a few more data definition stuff, which are also schemas essentially. So something about triggers, what are triggers, what are materialized views, and something about security constraints in databases if we have some time. So essentially, uh, these things should be familiar to you guys already. The queries will still be the same, but essentially these are some extra features that your database provides to you, which sort of makes your life easier, so to speak. So essentially, triggers are a piece of code that can be executed automatically behind the scenes when a database is modified. That is all that is. So if I modify the database using some insert statements or an update statements or what have you, if you write a trigger as well, then that particular code will also be executed once you insert something to the database or delete something from the database and things like that. Okay. So these are again similar to functions, but these are not something that you call on your own. These are executed behind the